Um, my name is Mariana Saintive. I am a talent AI strategist, a proud IBMer, and also a hacking HR chapter lead for Miami, Florida. So for those of you that are local to Miami, Florida, please join us next week for a tremendous panel on entrepreneurship and HR in Miami, or connect with me after the session. I'll be happy to share some more details. But today is not really about Miami, it's about data-informed HR, building and optimizing people analytics. So instead of having the traditional introduction, right, we thought it'd be much more fun, and thank you, Serena, for that idea, to ask our panelists instead, if we were to make a t-shirt about people analytics, what would that say? And I can start with the idea, the idea creator. So Serena, what would your t-shirt say about people analytics? Your people analytics t-shirt said.
So my t-shirt will be a quote from Jim Barksdale, and it would say, if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine.
That's awesome.
That'd be my t-shirt.
Courtney, you want to go next?
Yes, my People Analytics t-shirt would say, People Analytics, it's not just HR data. Probably you can read into that, but what I hear so often is, are we just looking at engagement? Are we just looking at demographics and talent information? Or are we looking at hard numbers, right? Are we looking at business metrics? And we are.
Thank you. And Dawn, you say you already have stickers, but I'm looking for your t-shirt idea. What would the t-shirt say?
So it would be hashtag data-driven HR, just like our stickers. So I am known to be very short and sweet and succinct, and so I feel like that kind of says it all.
Yeah, and I recently saw a podcast, and I can't forget, but like the tagline was, "Science is not a belief system." I wonder if you can do the same thing about data, right? Data is not a belief system, whether you're believing it or not. Right. But because we have, the three panelists from really different backgrounds, I wonder if you can spend a bit of time in telling us how about your journey, how you ended up working with people analytics, and if you can start with Dawn, please.
Yeah, so I started working on people analytics 17 years ago, so long before we knew the phrase people analytics. And I wouldn't say that I had the foresight to own that journey myself and know that I wanted to go into analyzing people data, but I was working in finance at Microsoft, and I was kind of lured over to HR because I had my first child and could not work the hours that I needed to in the job that I had at finance, and was looking for an opportunity where I could work part-time. And at the same time, one of my former colleagues in finance had moved over to HR in the compensation and benefits space. And he said, we really need more people like you that have an analytics capability in the HR organization. We have a data warehouse. We just don't know what to do with that information. So we'd love if you could come over and be part of this team. And the question I asked was, well, can I work part-time? And he said, yes. So we had a deal. And my plan was to come over to HR, work part-time for a few years while my kids were young, and then I would go back to finance. 17 years later, I'm still in HR. I've grown an amazing function of skills and experiences that all have to do with people analytics, and I love the role and the work, and I love kind of bringing analytics into people decisions. And so I have not left because there's still so much more to do. And so I wake up every morning with my long list of things that we still haven't accomplished yet. So maybe when we get there, maybe I'll decide to go back to finance.
Would you like to
go next? I've had a pretty linear path because I was trained as an organizational psychologist back in grad school. And one of my first jobs was actually an internship at Johnson & Johnson, where I looked at the effectiveness of recruiting. essentially looked at the schools that they recruited MBAs from and looked at their performance 1 to 2 years later. And this was back in 1997. So it's a pretty long time ago, dating myself. And we're still doing that today, right? But with so many other linkages and so much more data to look at and obviously understand way more about the employee life cycle and what makes that person successful. I definitely went sideways at one point in my career and did something completely different in sales and marketing. But when came back to HR, and this has always been my love, and HR research, survey research, et cetera, has been a magnet for me my whole career.
Thank you. And Serena?
Yeah, so I'm a labor economist by training, which is a little bit strange for the field. But if you think about it, it's labor, supply and demand, right? So supply and demand, instead of for goods, it's for people. I never thought I would be working in people analytics. Of course, when I graduated, that term didn't exist. So I started off in consulting, actually started doing litigation consulting in the labor and employment space. So used a lot of people data and really enjoyed that work. A few years later, when GE called and said they wanted to start maturing HR analytics, my initial thought was, wow, those two words traditionally don't go together, but sounds really exciting. And I never looked back. This is my fourth organization. I'm now with Kraft Heinz. It's my fourth people analytics leader role.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about building a people analytics team, right? For those of you that have been building and developing analytics function, what are the key shifts that you have experiencing in building and leading analytics team over the years? And Dawn, I know that that you've been with Microsoft for a long time, so if you could talk a little bit about that journey.
I think one of the biggest shifts for us was getting to a point where people were asking for the information more than we were pushing it to them. Okay, so in the early days, it was more around, hey, what can we do that's going to help inform the HR strategy and the initiatives that we're working on? And it was more, I thought it was more around selling. We were like selling to people. Oh, hey, we put together this great analysis that will help you in the decisions that you're making. And getting them to kind of get to a point where they were coming to us, the HR leaders were coming to us saying, hey, I have a problem, a business problem, and I think that data can help inform that problem and inform some actions we want to take. That was, I think, the biggest shift in our space, is once we kind of moved from push more to pull.
Serena, you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, sure. So definitely agree, Dawn. I've seen that shift as well. And so now it's not about how much I need to sell, but about how much my team can actually get done. It's about prioritization, right? Which is a much better problem to have.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a few shifts I have seen over time as I build up the people analytics teams in different organizations is the customers are asking for different things now. They're or predictive analytics displayed in the dashboard. If the UX is not great, you're going to have issues with adoption. And I've had customers literally tell me they want the iPhone experience, right? Don't make me take another tutorial. If I can't use it when I open it, it's not intuitive enough. So UX, the expectation has changed over time. As far as the team members themselves, I do see a lot more people coming from different fields as I build up the teams. And the data scientists I have now at Kraft Heinz and then at Coke Industries prior, it was all their first job in the people function. Previously came from other industries, whether it's healthcare or pharmaceuticals, logistics optimization, you name it. And I love the different perspectives they bring in solving people problems. They definitely bring a different lens that traditional folks who have, maybe were born and raised in HR and then decide to get a data science degree at some point. It's a little bit different. So I love that diversity. And on top of that, the customers themselves, like the HR leaders, also come from different backgrounds these days. I think I'm seeing a lot more from finance, sales and marketing, general business management. So they are much more comfortable with data. And to them, it's, hey, I can have analytics on other parts of my world. People should be the same. So again, going back to definitely less selling needed and more about prioritizing the various demands.
Thank you. And I see a few questions on our chat already. We were going to have some time at the end of the session to address those. So I'm taking note. That's not going to hold those until the end of our moderator panel here. Thank you for that. So we see that the volume of data and the metrics available for HR to report has increased exponentially. We know that 70% of the organizations expect to increase the resource they dedicate to talent analytics in the coming years. However, only 21% of HR leaders believe the organizations are effective in actually leveraging that talent data to inform the decisions. So when you think about data-informed HR, what are the biggest challenges that you see? We can start with Courtney.
Okay. This actually relates to one of the questions that someone asked in the chat. So, I have three challenges in my mind. One is the data infrastructure, right? Data engineering, data infrastructure. Getting the data into one place is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. There are ways that you can do people analytics without having a fancy data warehouse or a data lake. So we can talk about that. Part of it's just bare bones Excel, right? And maybe getting some information to Tableau in order to visualize it. But I think one of the challenges in getting business leaders what they need is getting that information quickly and accurately, and it has to be in one place, right, from one source. The other challenges are actually just having people analytics have access to business leaders. It doesn't happen in every company, and I'm consulting now. I was leading 2 people analytics teams before consulting, but I see it in my client groups. Not every people analytics team really has that relationship. They do, of course, with the HR business partners, but a lot of times the HR business partner is the funnel, and there is not that direct access to business leaders, and that's a challenge. The other challenge is, I think, maybe this goes hand in hand. People analytics teams sometimes are isolated, maybe in a way, kind of on an island. Again, this is just what I've seen in my experience, and maybe even exclusionary, right, to a certain degree, because they are the data experts that the rest of HR is not. Is there a way that we can, as people analytics teams, broaden and integrate, the rest of HR, not only upskill, right, from a data literacy standpoint, but how can we broaden and welcome the rest of HR and actually finance and IT, right, into our people analytics world, in order to produce the best products and outcome.
Thank you. Serena, you want to complement on that one?
Yeah, I think, Courtney, you've got to cover on the business leader side for sure. So I'll touch on the HR side. So within the HR function, I've seen in several organizations, because they are so large, because they're so scattered, and there's not specific training for data literacy, it can become an obstacle as we're trying to scale people analytics when there's not a foundational similar level understanding across the organization. Within the HR community, it becomes difficult. So I've, as a result, always spent a lot of time, I consider an investment really to help scale people analytics, to spend time doing, whether it's lunch and learns or large scale boot camps on people analytics. And typically I don't limit it to the HR community. So because business leaders ultimately are going to be the consumers and they're going to implement the changes, it's important for them to be involved as well. And as far as some more advanced, predictive analytics, sometimes we run into issues when there's not enough buy-in early on in the process. So So we've over time had great success with predictive modeling from an accuracy perspective, and sometimes not everything gets rolled out. Well, why is that? Because the end users were not brought in and early on, or maybe only part of the user groups were brought in. And ultimately, when you need to implement it on a larger scale, not everyone was on the same page. So I would say from within the HR community, data literacy and lack of buy-in at times would hold us back.
Tony, you want to compliment on anything that we just said?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I would caution a little bit. I mean, while I do completely agree with bringing in business leaders and not just HR leaders, what I do caution people with is substituting business leaders for HR leaders. Okay, the people analytics team can create a lot of chaos in an organization for HR specifically when they're working directly with business leaders and they don't actually have the partnership with HR. And so that's something that I always caution people with is, while, having that additional context from business leaders are important, it's always good for you to be in partnership and lockstep with your HR leader, because then you become the kind of the go-to person that can bypass HR. Okay, and that's not what we want to be. We don't want to be this, the secret mole that can provide the secret information that HR says is not really helping us move the dial on our strategy. In terms of building capability, I 100% agree with what Courtney and Serena said. It's something that we've had to focus a lot on in terms of, when we launch something, we don't just launch a tool and teach people how to use the tool. You teach people about the data that are in the tool. Okay, you teach people on what to do with the information. What action should you take? What action should you not take? Okay, the fact that this is just one piece of the puzzle or one part of one source of information, and that context is hugely valuable to round out and make sure that the actions that you're taking are appropriate. And so we often do learning guides, and we do a lot of these kind of do's and don'ts that we teach not just our HR organization, but also the business when we're providing information to them as well.
Thank you, Diana. And I think we almost, going to the next, good segue here, because I think the next point was, what are some of the strategies that you have implemented to improve the impact of your people analytics insights? Is there any?
I'm happy to jump in there first. So the strategies that we've used is that we use that question in terms of, are you ready to take action, as a way to prioritize our work? Because there are times that we go and do things that we think will or should get used, and actually they don't. There was an example of analysis we did 5 years ago that just got used in the last few months to make a decision. And I loved that. But you know what? That period of time between when we actually did the analysis and when it was used to make a decision was hard. It was like, wow, we spent a lot of time doing that work. Was it for nothing? Okay. And if we had asked the question when we did the analysis, depending on what the outcome is, are you ready to take action? If we had the answer, and the answer at that point was no, we're in no position right now to do that, then we probably should have worked on something else, and kind of put that at the bottom, not removed it from the list completely, but put it at the bottom of the list. And so I do think it's important to have that conversation about how ready are you. Sometimes the readiness has to do with the money that it takes to create some of these programs and create some of the change. Sometimes it's the space in terms of, well, we have so many other things going on in the system, we can't take on this other huge change management right now. Okay, so let's kind of table that and push that off for another year. So that's one of the strategies that we've used to make sure that the analytics that we're doing has the greatest impact. I'm very interested to hear how my panelists have tackled that one.
Yeah, I can chime in. Something that I'm pushing for, and this is not easy, so by all means, I wouldn't say I'm quite there. The thought is to prioritize projects and product development by the business value it creates, whether it's a revenue that's going additional revenue that it will generate if we were to complete the project, or cost savings that will be achieved. And then really have the HR business partners maybe work with finance and our team to figure out that value that it's going to bring to the organization, whether it's descriptive or predictive.
Courtney, you want to share, or should we go?
Your answers were so amazing. I'll leave it at that. Don't want to confuse anyone.
Okay, and I see some comments on the chat here that we will address just in a bit. We know the analytic skills, right? We talked about reskilling and upskilling your HR. Analytic skills are certainly in high demand across organizations, not just within HR. But how do you ensure your team is equipped and have a career path within analytics? And Courtney, if you want to take that.
I can start there. Yeah.
Sure.
In one of my past teams, the way that we've at least thought about career paths is, obviously, what is someone's specialty, right? Not every people analytics team has the same skills, right? There's at least 4 different buckets of skill sets that an analytics team has. So within those skill sets, can people hone in on, let's say, a specialty within HR? So, and this is one of the ways that I did this on my last team. One person was talent acquisition, deep in talent acquisition data. Another one was actually really deep in operational effectiveness and really workflow and getting our offshore team to ensure that they are being most effective at automating and passing on things that cannot be automated and figuring out what to do about all these ad hoc requests that we get. And then also there's people who are experts in organizational effectiveness and performance management. And perhaps those people could move into other parts of HR, right, from people analytics. I mean, I think there has to be some type of out path for people because there isn't always an up path. But it also makes room for new, fresh ideas, people, right, to come in at a junior level on a people analytics team to bring experience from the outside, but also just be the junior level staff and allow the others to move up and manage them or move up and, like I said, out into another HR function. So allowing for some skill upskilling in various parts of HR.
Dawn, you want to implement that? Share your experience?
Yeah, I mean, we might be in a unique situation at Microsoft just because we are one of many analytics orgs across our company. In fact, we share a profession with other analytics folks. So we're not in the HR profession like the rest of my HR colleagues. We're in the analytics discipline that's under another profession. And so people do see that there is a career path to go into analytics groups in other parts of the company, like marketing analytics or analytics for different product teams. I mean, we have so many analytics professionals at Microsoft. We actually have there's even a data science community that comes together just with the data scientists, okay, because they also are a unique discipline that's shared across the company. So while we do have people that feel like they can take their skills and be better HR leaders now that they have really kind of mastered the art of analytics, we have just as many people that will move to other parts of Microsoft and look to grow their skills and experiences there. And so it's kind of an exciting place to be, realizing that a lot of companies, this is happening as companies are really focused on the digital transformation. It's not just Microsoft where the analytics disciplines is growing in many different areas of the company.
Okay. All right, let's talk about your vision of what people analytics will be in the next 5 years. What would you say, Steven, if you want to start?
Sure. 5 years. Wow. I think I'll go with three
What's
things.
next, I guess,
Yes, but
in your vision?
yeah, I'm gonna pick three. So in my mind, analytics in 5 years will be more embedded in talent decisions in general and be more connected to business outcomes like revenue, profit, and cost. Second, there will be more real-time insights that are democratized, not the data themselves, but the insights to not only HR, but managers and business leaders as we get more comfortable with the data and get better at the governance itself. That should get better over time. And then thirdly, I would say what is considered advanced analytics today, like organizational network analysis, ONA, or sentiment analysis that seem to be limited to small teams or special teams that have the luxury to hire their own data scientists will become much more readily available for whether it's out of the box or built in-house. Those are my three for 5 years.
3 and 5. Who would like to go next? Don and Courtney? What's your 5-year vision?
Okay. Should I go? I'll go.
Sure.
5 years is a long time. I have a hard time thinking in 5-year increments. I prefer 2 years. Perhaps this will still be happening in 5 years. So I think the employee experience is, hashtag employee experience is a buzzword that we have seen probably daily in our emails or our LinkedIn feeds. What does that mean? And what does that mean for people analytics? I think we'll figure out more and more as time goes on. One example could be mapping the employee experience to the customer experience, right? Which I'm sure a lot of organizations are doing, but some are not. How do we understand the customer data through employee data in a way that we're not? And I think that's a huge priority if we can, depending on the business. If it's B2B, right, versus business to consumer, B2B maybe less so. I also think we will be working, I would hope, more in a web or more hand in hand with finance and IT. I don't think HR and finance and IT are always friends. I want to be better friends. I want to see us be better friends across the board. And why is that? Because I think our data aligns, obviously, or it should align from a finance perspective better than it does, depending on the company. And IT is just a necessary evil, if we even want to call it that. I'm calling it that because I'm not a technology person, and I realize I really have to be in this role. Technology is huge. And so just by virtue of the amount of people analytics vendors that have popped up in the last 12 to 18 months, I think technology will be a huge component, right, of people analytics, if it's not already.
And I wanted to
Yes.
But we can talk a little bit about employee experience, right? And related to employee trust and buy-in. So how important would you say is employee trust and buy-in in creating and sustaining an advanced people analytics capability? And I guess that's open to this.
Yeah, and that's what I would have said about, people analytics in 5 years. That's going to become front and center for a lot of the work that we do. It's around transparency. I like to say there's 3 pillars of building employee trust: transparency, value, and purpose. And I think those are going to those are going to become more and more important as we think about the field of people analytics, especially as technology allows us to nudge people, to seamlessly kind of, remind people to do different things, basically help them change behaviors in a way that lends to outcomes that you're trying to drive. And employees are going to have to feel like they trust how the data is being used. Okay, so as more and more data is leveraged, I also think that as data, Serena mentioned kind of data, democratization of data. I actually don't like that phrase at all, because
I said insights, Dawn.
No. This was very early on, not just now, but like very early on. You said democratization. I'm not saying people use it all the time. It gives me cause, kind of a little bit of a pause when people talk about the democratization of data. They use that as an excuse, actually, at our company. We're hand over all the information because, we should all have access to it. Data democratization. It's like, well, no, not necessarily. Everywhere there's a purpose that you should have in a business need to access employee data, and it needs to be a good business purpose in order for us to really kind of do the work. Just because we can do the work doesn't mean we should do the work, and to really critically look at what we're doing. So I think that is super important. It's going to become even more important as GDPR really settles in, and the rest of the world kind of gets with employee data privacy.
Agree.
Yeah, no, agree. I think it's so critical, and that's why I don't advocate for democratization of data itself. But certainly, that doesn't mean everyone should get everything. That's not what transparency should mean.
Right.
And I think on the topic of employee trust, as we mentioned buy-in earlier on, right, in the conversation, that's part of the process as well. It's not just about business leaders and HR leaders are buying into your new project, but also employees, right, who are going to potentially be affected by something new, whether it's an algorithm or something else. And if I can I'll go back to my T-shirt. The back of the T-shirt will say "Use people data for good," hashtag. And sometimes I ask a question to leaders who are considering something that may give those of you on the panel pause, or, oh, really, do we want to do that? The question is, if this comes out in New York Times tomorrow, do you feel good about it, right? So if we don't tell employees today and they find out through New York Times, is that going to cause any heartburn? Well, if you pause, hesitate anyway, then maybe it's time to go back and think about whether or not we should take this on.
I love that, Serena. Yep, I completely agree.
And I think a people analytics leader has to be a savvy communicator because of this exactly, to help people understand what data we're getting and why, right? What's the business need, and how are we going to inform you about it, right? What are you going to get out of it? I guess, or maybe not inform you about every little detail, but what will you get out of it? Is something that I think is a craft, right? That we need to hone in on as people analytics leaders.
And Courtney, even just having that rhythm of going back and sharing results with employees, okay? Because I think historically we haven't even thought about that. It's been
Right.
more recent. In more recent years, we've had the platforms like LinkedIn and other platforms to share. What we found is by sharing externally, we have more employees reading the information than any forum that we can share internally. So just to have those platforms and know that that's something that you should do when you're doing analysis, it builds employee trust.
Yep. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I think that leads to one of my last questions before we go to the attendees and to the questions from the audience. But if there was one thing, right, something that you wish you knew about people analytics before you started, as you think about building and optimizing analytics, what would that be? And Serena, since again you gave this idea, I'm going to go first.
Yeah, I would say, oh gosh, almost 10 years ago before I started, I wish I knew that sometimes it's valuable to confirm with data what you thought you already knew. So Adam Grant has this article on the surprising value of obvious insights. I don't know if you have read it. It's interesting. And those of you who have been in this profession long enough, at times you have run across a HR leader who will tell you, you're not telling your data or your analytics, you're not telling me anything I didn't know. And I think I've learned over time in my profession that sometimes it's helpful to confirm. So
I like that. I think I gave away mine earlier when I said the technology, embedding and finance web that we need to create as people analytics leaders. I didn't realize, I had this HR psychology background. I didn't realize that I really needed to know technology. And I really do need to know finance basics. I would have studied those things longer, right? Rather than crash coursing myself or learning on the job, right? Which you always have to do. But I wish I knew that a decade ago.
So I wish I had had the foresight of really understanding the detriment of data islands and even data peninsulas, to the pain that we've experienced over the years of kind of unwinding decisions that we made when we implemented different technology in our systems. That's what I wish that I knew. I wish I really kind of had a good understanding of the systems infrastructure, and that you want all of your data to be able to talk to each other, okay, or to have a clean and easy way to link together. And I feel like we're on a really good path now, but 10, 15 years ago, we just didn't know the best way to orchestrate some of those.
So John, in your definition, a data island or a data peninsula is a piece of technology that doesn't talk to another piece of technology.
Exactly. So when you implement a system and the data sits there on that island, and then you implement another system, and it's just been recently that we know the words APIs, and we know the words data lakes, and that you can have your data in different lakes, but they can still talk to each other as long as you have a key that joins them together. So we spent a lot of time kind of piecing different data sets together, because we just didn't know how we should structure the technology. And that actually, for people starting out, don't be afraid to find that it takes a long time to prepare the data to analyze, that you don't just sit down and just analyze all day. That a biggest part of the puzzle is preparing the data for analysis. And once you realize that that's just a normal state of affairs, then you, as Enrique is saying, be patient, then things go a lot better.
Yeah, that's a good point. That one of our first questions from our attendees is what is your advice for companies thinking about people analytics but that don't have the data warehouse? Can you talk about the starter version of people analytics?
I could start.
Anyone?
Yeah, I could start that. I mean, from a basic level, I think I alluded to this earlier. What are the correlations that you could come up with in Excel, right? Just dump it in Excel, use two variables, and get an answer, right? That's important to the business and a priority and something that people are asking about. And if you don't have the exact data, approximate it, right? It doesn't need to be perfect. It should be relatively clean, but not sparkling clean. And you can get a direction, right, using two variables in Excel. Power BI is another, right, John? But Power BI is also amazing. And that was something that we started at AIG, my last role, while we were implementing Visier, in order to just jumpstart some insights and jumpstart some visualizations and getting business leaders to understand what they're about to receive.
And what I would say is even Excel has some great visualizations if your company doesn't have access to Power BI. You can go basic.
You're not throwing it.
Yep. You started it, Courtney, not me.
For sure.
Yeah, and I'll toss in another. Alteryx has been tremendously helpful in the organizations I've been with. So if you can't, essentially everyone can potentially become a mini data engineer and do a lot of the transformation and start to make the process a little bit easier. So you're not doing everything purely in Excel.
I echo Alteryx.
question from Luis here. There seems to be a flip-flop between using analytics to inform future business decisions versus the business asking for analytics to support a business decision. Does that make sense? The flip-flop.
I feel like it's still both. I mean, I think there's a time and a place for both of those. And I think that really goes to good partnership. You know, there are going to be times when the business thinks of something before that they want to do, and they want to be informed on whether the data also shares that sentiment as well. And then there are times when the analytics is leading the business decision.
And there was a follow-up to that question. So what do you consider insights? How do you help the business partner think about potential insights? How do you help explain the difference between analytics and reporting?
So I can take that. I run a really fun workshop called Reporting or Analytics. And I put on screenshots, no joke, from out of the box reporting as an example, whether that's Kronos or your HCM, versus analytics, often in some sort of dashboard format that has trends, maybe benchmarking, maybe some insights on the screen as you hover over your fancy dashboard. So I have the audience of hundreds just raise their hand and tell me if they think that's reporting or analytics. And then eventually they learn from each other and then learn from this initially potentially painful to some, but eventually a lot of fun process to everyone involved on the difference, and just by looking at examples. And in simple terms, reporting is what comes straight out of a system, right? No manipulation of the data. There's no trends. There's no benchmarking. And analytics is more.
Serena, I love that course. I think I might want to take that as well. I think I could always use some tips. And I'll just answer this briefly. Analytics is not a score. I feel like a lot of what my leaders had looked at in the past when I give what they're asking for is, what's my score, right? Where am I? What is the number saying? What is the number, right? Not necessarily what is the number saying, but what is the number? That's all they want to know. But analytics is, what does the number mean? What's the direction? What's the storyline that will guide our next decision or will guide our action, right? That's the analytics.
We also like to say reporting plus context equals analytics.
Perfect t-shirt material.
Yep, more t-shirts.
There was a point here following up what Don had said about on data democratization decision on how data can be leveraged to drive the right behaviors and eliminate biases.
Data can be I'm not sure if that's a question or not, but yeah, I'll try to tackle that. I think that you have to understand the behaviors that you're trying to drive, or the outcomes that you're trying to drive, and understand what are those behaviors to drive those outcomes. And it's not always just using HR data to understand those. I think Courtney talked about employee customer experience with employee experience, and the relationship that exists between them. So my comment on data democratization, because I do think that you should be partnering across the organization with other data owners, okay, for the best analytics. My point on data democratization is that there's a way to do that so that privacy and data confidentiality is respected. There's a way to partner, and there's a way to kind of just hand over everything in which confidentiality and privacy might not be respected. And so that was more my point, is that there's more context associated with data democratization than just kind of opening up every data element for everyone to just use. I'm not sure if I answered the question or not, but.
Well, that was such a... And we can continue. I haven't seen anything else on the chat here. But as leaders in this discipline, where would you like to focus more of your time on to develop this time? What would you, if you had more time, I guess the question is, what would you like to develop?
I could just start quickly. I think it depends on where you come from, right? It depends on what discipline you're coming from. Like I mentioned before, obviously there's so many different buckets of skill sets that make up a people analytics team, and not every leader is created equal. And some people come from labor market, economics,
Yeah.
technology, psychology. So we would need to upskill on the other, so we have more of a well-roundedness as a leader. So I personally feel like I need to upskill in more of the harder technology, finance skills. Psychology, I'm well done there. Although there's always more to learn.
Yeah, I would say I am probably the opposite of you, Courtney. So definitely now looking at, as we're rolling out a new employee listening strategy focusing on employee experience and employee engagement, I'm finding myself learning more about the world that you come from, right, around survey design and assessments and human behaviors and how to make sure we set up the processes to drive the right behaviors going forward. So I think definitely it depends on your background and your experience and where you need to go in the future and where you want to go.
And I agree with all of that. I mean, gosh, there's so much to learn in this space. And what I love is that there's more and more out there for us to learn from. And so, in the first kind of 10 years of my journey, there wasn't a lot of information for me to learn, to kind of glean. And I just have loved the explosion of it in the last kind of 5 years or so. I remember when Laszlo Bock came out with the book People Rules. It was like the first book that I could really dig into that really talked about the work that we had been doing, but we didn't know what to call it. We didn't really know even what we were doing.
Speaking your language.
Yeah. And it was so eye-opening for me to realize that there were other people around the globe that were tackling the same issues and were doing this work. I would say that one of the areas that I would love more time to focus on is this idea of, Serena brought it up, as behaviors and really understanding how technology can help us more and more. And, one of the things that we're working on right now is a manager dashboard. It's called Manager Hub, but it's an insights generation engine. Okay, so it serves up not just data for managers, but insights that drives their behaviors. And how can we do more of that? How can we do more to basically empower our managers to be their best selves every single day, because that helps our employees. So that's what I would love to spend more time with, and the moments that matter in terms of the employee experience. That's really going to give us the biggest bang for the work that we do.
We talked about organizations that are starting up, and we just talked about, as a mature leader in this field, where would you focus if you would like to develop further? What about those HR practitioners that are just starting the analytic journey? What would you recommend the beginning of the career path? What would be some of the initial steps?
Be curious. I would say be curious and stay curious. It's a evolving field for all of us, and there's so much learning that, such as this forum, for example, that is available if you just make the time.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay, I can't see, Don, your video is frozen, so I can't see if you're moving or not. So I think if someone's coming from HR into people analytics, they have a skill set that a lot of people analytics team members don't have, right? They have that deep knowledge of an HR discipline. So how can we apply that? For example, in learning, right? If someone's coming from learning into people analytics, and hopefully they did some analytics there in learning, how can we better apply analytics programs? How can we do internal research to understand what makes our people successful or our leaders successful? How can that translate into a learning program? And then how can we measure the effectiveness of that? So almost like I bring a case study to the table from your discipline that people analytics team members may not be thinking of.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I don't have that much to add except for to start small. Don't think that you're going to step into a people analytics function and become a data scientist in a couple weeks. And I just read an awesome article the other week about how you don't need to be a data scientist to be data driven. Okay. And so that's what I would say to HR leaders is don't worry about, don't worry about being an IO psychologist, a data scientist, understanding even every type of statistical model that you can build, but just bringing your curiosity, as Serena said, and starting small and understanding the impacts that you can have while you continue to learn and grow is super important.
Great. Thank you all. We have a few more minutes, so I'm going to try to answer the questions here from our participants. Next question from Cheryl. Do you have any examples of how organizations are using data to create or enhance accessibility in the workplace? Cheryl.
I mean, I can...
Accessibility. I just wanted to clarify the question. Is it from a
Right.
disability standpoint?
Cheryl, if you're there, about accessibility.
That's what I was wondering.
If it's not on the disability...
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, I can answer that because it's something that we are very focused on at Microsoft, not just internally, but for our products specifically. So we have a really robust process that we go through for everything that we do internally, and making sure that it's accessible. We have a very high bar for accessibility and understanding how do you create graphs that are accessible and the screen readers, and making sure that the screen readers are able to understand all of the different aspects of the reporting portals that you're dealing with. And what I watch the team that's in charge of this within our IT function is they're using data to make a lot of these decisions. I mean, they're listening to people. They're using telemetry as to how often people are using these. So I think it's definitely an aspect of using data to drive decisions, not necessarily work that we do on our team in particular, but I see the work going on.
Okay. And then I believe it's the last question for today. Do you all have recurring KPI metrics that your teams monitor and report out, such as turnover? Can you share some of those, what some of those are? What are some of the metrics that you're currently reporting on? Or typical metrics, I guess. Question.
Yeah, so I think, it really depends on the organization that you're in. How I get to those set of metrics is by sitting down with whoever needs to be involved in your organization, right? That could be the CHRO, that could be the CFO, or both of them at the same time, and figuring out what the business needs to know. And in my mind, the question is, how do I know the health of the health of my organization, right? How do I know that's going well? How do I know talent in general, and keeping an eye on it? So for some organizations that might be turnover. For some organizations they may have a lot of vacancies, right? They may be going through growth mode and they are keeping an eye on how quickly positions are being filled. For some other organizations, D&I is such an important topic that they keep track of it on a near real-time basis. So it really depends on those problems that are the most critical to your business. So I would say in my experience for the various organizations, the set of metrics are not always the same, but there are certain fundamental ones that would be consistent. Turnover would certainly be one of them.
I'll just add that about, depends on the business that you're in. I was at Deloitte before AIG, and actually Deloitte's very interested in things like well-being, and they want to track it. And how do they do that? It may not be a direct correlative, but they look at things like burnout as it relates to travel. And vacation, right? Is someone actually taking vacation? How frequently do they take it and how much do they take? How many flights are they on? How many times do they have to change planes? How many hotel nights are they staying per week? How many hours are they working? How many weekend hours are they working? I mean, these kinds of things are what leaders need to know in a consulting environment. In addition to things like utilization and managed revenue. We also, of course, look at things like engagement and retention of early career, right? Early career people who we've invested so much recruiting dollars in. We want to ensure that that's paying off in the time period that we expect it to. The model for a consulting firm like Deloitte is they want turnover, but they want it at the right time. And then they want good things to happen from that turnover, like hiring us later when you go internal. So there's lots of different metrics depending on the business.
Don't you want to compliment anything?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I agree. In fact, I get often asked quite often, can you just share the Power BI dashboards that you use so we can implement those at our company? And I say, well, no, for a couple of reasons. One, you know, every company is unique. Every company has a unique culture and a unique strategy that they're trying to drive. And what works at Microsoft might not work at your company. And so you need to really figure out what those are. And, you know, to Courtney's point about sentiment, you know, culture is super important for us. We've been on a culture change journey for the last 5 years, and so that's something that we look at is the aspect of our culture and whether or not we're moving the dial. And again, that depends on where you are in the journey and what your priorities are. But there are definitely metrics that we look at on a regular basis, depending on what that important strategy is that we're focused on.
Okay, we almost at time, and I know he asked me to close this panel just before 4. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Dawn, Courtney, and Serena. Thank you so much for your participation today. Thank you for those that have joined us. Thank you, Enrique, for putting this together. I know all those recordings, the session are going to be recorded, and I hope you enjoyed. And I'll connect with you outside of the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Mariana. Thanks for being a great moderator.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks,
thank you,
everyone.
Enrique.